what we're going to go into now is we're bringing back all of our fantastic speakers who are still with us this afternoon, not because they've passed away or anything like that, but because you've still been kind enough to stick with us on the main screen here. And first, I'd just like to bring Val to the fore. So Val, do you want to reintroduce yourself? And then perhaps just share with us, are there any kind of salient points that have really resonated with you this afternoon? Or do you think there's something that we've missed? So Val, let's come to yourself first. And then we will just quickly move around the room to get everybody else's kind of, just salient points that they've registered.
Yes, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Valerie Malte. I am the Corporate Environmental Manager at Core Mining. I essentially started my career in mining in 1983. Joking just because I come from a mining community and my father's an underground miner, and I studied in the Sudbury mining camp, grew up in Timmins. And so a lot of what I heard today resonated with me. I think when we talk about what's changed since, for example, I was a kid growing up within the mining community, and where we are today as an industry and what we're talking about are certainly not things that were discussed even, and I was certainly not aware of. That community engagement piece is something that, despite growing up in a mining community that paid for all of my social activities as a kid, I really did not know what they did outside of what my dad did and what I heard at the dining room table. So I appreciate everybody's points and presentations. A few things stood out to me in terms of themes. I think the collaboration piece is so essential. I really liked the illustration of the system, and maybe it's just because that's something that I'm working very hard on right now within our company, is like developing systems. But I think by illustrating the system, that's where we could start to take a step back and identify those opportunities for shared value, which I think is the other theme that everybody mentioned or touched on throughout the afternoon here. So and that's of course where we need to go, and I think that's what we're all here to try to find a solution to get towards. The other thing that really stood out to me was the time piece. So everybody touched on that in a different way. For me, within my role at Core Mining, time, we put it into the context of, we identify a project, we have to study it, we permit it, we develop it, and we close it. And thank you, Stuart, for mentioning closure. You don't often hear a geologist bring closure to the table, especially an exploration geologist. So I appreciate that. But the time piece is really important in this discussion, not only from a decarbonization standpoint, but when we talk about the investment community. And when we look at the mining industry, it takes a very long time to get that financial return. And I think that proper engagement with the financial community is a critical piece in terms of making sure that we're not forced into rushing our relationships on the ground with our Indigenous populations, with our communities, because that puts us all in an impossible position to deliver, to meet anybody's expectations. And we all know that a bad quarterly statement is probably the worst thing that we can do to continue maintaining that positive relationship with the investment community. And we do need that positive relationship, because that's what funds our activities. So and the decarbonization piece from a time perspective is absolutely critical, because we don't have all of the logical solutions at our fingertips right now to be able to be net zero, to take that mineral out of the earth and send it to the various places that utilize those critical minerals downstream. And so we all need to be aware of that. And I appreciate that, Christopher, you're an optimist. I'm an enthusiast. So, and I think that everybody at this table, or that pursues a career in this realm, has to have some element of those character traits. But I think that we need to continue to identify various solutions. So we approach it at CORE multi-pronged. We can't just have one solution. We have to have everybody at the table collaborating to bring their piece to the table, because every piece may or may not have a significant contribution to reducing that emission. But I think that, you know, going back to those non-quantifiable pieces, we still need to consider those ideas. So, and I think the last piece, not to take up too much time, is the piece about uncertainty. So we have scope 3 as part of this discussion. And I think that is an obstacle that we all need to come to the table and have a real discussion about, in order to ensure that the totals or whatever we are disclosing is of significant importance. Because, you know, going back to the scores that we were talking about in the first presentation, thank you, Michael, for that. We don't want to be focusing on chasing the wrong things and deploying resources to things that are not going to have a material impact. And so, yeah, those were my observations. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be a part of this discussion.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Val. Absolutely brilliant and very enthusiastic. Brilliant. Michael, perhaps if we come across to yourself and just get any salient points from yourself that you think have come out from this afternoon, and then Stuart, let's go across to yourself.
Sure, thank you. I think it's there's been something to draw from every discussion up to this point in time. One thing that I was going to show and I didn't, just sort of at the end of my presentation, and I'll do it now just to highlight some of the points. Here we go.
It's working.
So this is right. So this is a list of, you know, we were talking about materiality, and I think Val just sort of touched on it again here, being important. What's important, and so this is that idiosyncratic part of the ESG ratings that I didn't get to, where we're looking at exposure and how companies are managing their exposure, and then also grading the management. But then here's sort of these are the issues that show up, and these are, I think, from 2016 to 2019, the amount of event tags that affected the mining sector. And you can see emissions, effluents, and waste was far and above the most important. Community relations and labor relations are at a number of the rating agencies lumped together. But you can see those are also significant there. And then it's occupational health and safety, business ethics, and bribery down the list. The ones at the bottom where you see duplicated gets cut off for the slide presentation, but it's in the supply chain. So I think, you know, part of what was going on that Miguel was talking about was very important. The constructing trust aspect of it, and community relations, how important that is, the social license to operate. I thought the points that Manuel made were also along that same lines, and important. The dynamic materiality. So we tend to think of this as being, here are the impacts, and community relations is one of the material issues that is examined, and community emissions, effluents, and waste is another one. But part of that is, and I think Christopher was maybe alluding to this too, is that those are static as far as the assessments go by the financial markets, or at least by the rating agencies. And the financial markets are looking, saying, we need something a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more on the ground and up to date. And so I agree that there's a little bit more, and again, sort of what Stuart was talking to about sending in your community engagement teams. And, you know, I've got another chart where I, you know, sort of have a U-shaped, and it's the financing of a project across the life cycle, with just above the U, there's, you know, the parallel line, or the horizontal line that's a zero. You know, you're in the hole for using your existing cash, and then you go to equity markets and debt markets, get to the bottom, and then you come across at some point in time, 4 or 5 years into the build, and you're now generating a positive return, and so your risk profile changes. And I always use that as an example because it's at the bottom of that U where communities will say, this is the most important place where I can renegotiate the contracts and extract more from the mining company as to what they're going to do for my community. And then you talk to the mining companies and say, that's the worst place to have a conversation with me because I've already got sunk costs. I'm halfway through the build and I can't go and change all the stuff that came in behind it. So it was sort of the idea of, if you can tackle this, like Stuart was saying, if you can tackle these things and get them cleared up and identified at the beginning, then yeah, your cost becomes less, and the sooner you are turning the lights on and the sooner you are back to making money or having the positive impact. And then I think lastly, it just gets to the business model idea is coming up with a parallel. Right now, everything is dollar based, and that's what we're thinking of. But there's a good argument that we can run potentially and start to develop a parallel valuation, and that is going to be off of carbon. And I think we've had a couple of the speakers address that, saying, you know, how are you valued based off of carbon? The carbon either that you're creating and where it goes through the economy. And this gets into the circular economy, steel. Stuart asked the question, how many tons of steel in a wind turbine? It's 3,000. And so when you can do a chart and take a look at where wind turbines are going up, and you see large fields in Nevada, for instance, or anywhere, and you go, that's 3,000 tons of steel for each wind turbine. That's huge. So yeah, very much I was a part of the, you know, and did the steel sector as well, and responsible steel, hydrogen steel, green steel. But then it brings up sort of Christopher's page from the Financial Times. China is coal-fired steel making plants, and the urbanization trends there and in Africa are going to continue, and that is going to be interesting to take a look at. Steel we can reuse infinitely in recycling, but yet we don't, and we're still mining it to the extent we are. So yeah, all of them were very good, and all of them I can show you how when I think about them related to ESG and finances, but I'll leave that for the discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Michael. Brilliant. Stuart, what about your comments? And then I'll come to Christopher, who I know has his hand up.
It's probably pressing, so we let him go in first. If it's
okay,
relevant
yeah,
to...
sure. On you go, Christopher.
Too kind, Stuart. So we're just really responding on that piece about dynamic materiality and the sort of challenge that people are facing there. I think to your comment earlier about what has changed, the way that reporting, disclosure, and investors are looking at things, with the reputation looking at forward-looking targets, outcomes, featuring much more heavily in company disclosure. It is interesting when you look at the large asset managers like BlackRock, who invest in satellite technology to go out as part of their portfolio risk management, so they can go and do the monitoring of your assets on a much more real-time basis. So actually, when they go into an active, engaged conversation, they will come to you with their questions about what's happening on the site before you tell them. And I think to that dynamic piece, where a lot of the sort of policies, procedures, and traditional disclosure is on evidence, CDP, this is how much we did disclose. And so, yeah, that's lovely. What are you going to do? That's the evidence to track performance. So where everyone's saying the TCFD world is saying the baseline is you. You tell us where you're trying to get to, and then we'll track you against you. We're not trying to go and set something arbitrary. And that's why a lot of these regulations are getting quite interesting, is because companies are wrestling with, blimey, I'm having to do what I said I was going to do. And so and the asset managers are now saying, well, I need to get ahead of the curve. How do I go and get the ground-based truth to match up with some long-range sensing technology? So some interesting ways to play, where I think that sort of plays to both monitoring, good disclosure, and that dynamic nature.
And I guess with that as well, Christopher, there's the whole, yes, go in and ask the right questions and then follow up on it with action. So if the company doesn't do the right thing or you know, give the right answer, for example, then walk away from them, or, you know, use that stewardship responsibility as an investor and take action.
Investor activism has certainly been big, as we've seen with something like Engine Number One forcing some fairly significant changes at places like Exxon.
Yeah. Stuart, Val's got her hand up. Are you okay for me to go to Val quickly? Yeah, excellent. Val, over to you. Oh, and you've got that mute button on. Ah.
I took my hand off. I said apologies to Stuart. Sorry for doing that. But I just needed to chime in there because something really stood out to me from Michael's presentation about the consensus. And there was no consensus. It appeared as though there is consensus for who we know are the bad players. But I wonder if those bad players, quote unquote, are the ones who just don't have the resources to report in to all of these metrics, which it takes a tremendous amount of time to do this. However, on the ground, they're doing the right thing. And so I just don't know how to tie those two together, but I think that it's worth not necessarily saying that we all agree that the people who don't report aren't doing the right thing. Perhaps they're junior companies trying to do the right thing and they need a handout, you know?
Yeah, and I think this is, I agree with you there, Val. I mean, the number of people who come to us and say, look, we've got this amount of money to be able to spend. Do we spend it on reporting or do we spend it on action? And it's so difficult because actually they might not get more money unless they do report, but they're reporting on something that they haven't done because they haven't got, etc. So yeah, I can see that Stuart's now leant into the camera. I'm going to come across to Stuart. We're going to give him his opportunity. On you go, Stuart, and then I will attempt to go to Miguel unless somebody else puts their hand up. On you go, Stuart. Thanks,
Sarah. And for me, one of my sort of informative moments in my life was working in southern Peru, the Quellaveco project near Moquegua. So I think Miguel's presentation today really talking about how we changed the conversation from this very patriarchal way we used to think about building projects and engaging with communities to actually coming in and being partners and looking for true solutions that will be shared, will create value, actually talks to me a lot. One of the words I have trouble with as a geologist, a scientist, a person working for a mining company is sustainability, because we are an exploitive industry. And I think we often ignore that we are exploiting non-renewable resources. Yet we love to put this banner of sustainability around what we do. And so I think we need to be careful at times that we're not, I think greenwashing was a phrase someone used today, we're not creating this belief that we are wonderfully green, wonderfully sustainable. We are exploiting limited resources. So if we accept that and then understand, as Miguel really well pointed out, how we can turn that into a force for good, not just a big hole in the ground, I think is a really wonderful outcome. And it's actually explaining that well about why we are doing things, how we can create these solutions and enable it. So yeah, great presentation. I think often presentations that I don't understand are the ones that really interest me. So putting the F into ESG, Michael, I think somebody else said wonderfully, and I'll paraphrase, I'm a scientist, not an economist, which I think is a bit rude to economists. But it's understanding really within the bubble we get into about thinking that it's all about tons and grade, it's all about your body stupid, is actually thinking about actually what is the externality around what we're doing and who is going to pay for what we do, who is going to benefit from what we do, and how does the world actually perceive within our bubble what we are doing. And obviously that's where the financial community really comes in to point us in the directions that they think we should be thinking, which is quite often different from what we think is important. So yeah, I really enjoyed today. Lots of really interesting different rabbit holes to burrow down, and yeah, it's been fun.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Stuart. Brilliant. Miguel, how about yourself? What do you think?
Oh, I think that is a very interesting day. We talk about the different topics, and I suggest that that in my opinion, at the end, the world now is changed, and if all actors not work more collaborating, cooperation with all actors around to any industry, it's difficult to continue development, no? And it's difficult to not obtain the sustainable world and the sustainable activity. We need more collaboration. Why? Because the more collaboration is possible to first generate trust, listen more and talk less, no? and obtain the good environment to it's possible to resolve the needs around to any activity. In the case of mining, and in the case of Peru, in Peru, the mining operation is near to the village, the communities that don't have water, don't have energy, don't have roads. And if these communities and the village wait that the national authorities resolve this, probably 10, 20 or 30 years, and it's not possible to resolve this. We need a collaboration with the principal actors. The idea of the share value, in my opinion, is a innovative idea because it's not a donation, it's not philanthropy, it's how to resolve the needs, but at the same time obtain benefit for the company. No? In the case of mining, for example, the training people, the training at the local suppliers that give service competencies, no, is important. Now in the new change in the world, no, the mining 4.0, we need a new technology. It's possible to train in the people, and these people live near of the mining give this service. No? And at the end, in the case of purpose, no? I mentioned the purpose because the purpose, maybe you know, now all companies think about the why exists, no? And if you define the purpose, it's possible to work very hard to obtain this purpose, and this purpose obviously include all stakeholders. And in my opinion, the best tool to obtain this is a share value strategy. No? And for this reason, I think that thank you for the opportunity to share, and very grateful to participate because the topics that during this day is very interesting for all. And now the big challenge is how to talk about this, how to make these ideas in reality, no? in the all countries, in the mining countries. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Miguel. And Pauline, just before I come to wrap up, do you have any final words that you want to share with us? She'll find the mute button. It's all good. It's all good. Yeah.
Found it. Yes. There are a few things that I've scribbled things down that I think I would like to speak out. Stuart's kind of provided me a nice link because you were talking about words, and I think words, language are really important. I know it's not the only part of communication, but it's a very important part. And I think it's the bit when we've talked a lot, haven't we, about interdisciplinary collaboration, and that's what this week has been about. This is the different disciplines coming together and talking, and that's where we're most likely to misunderstand each other, is when we use language, because there's an assumption that, of course, we know what somebody means when they use this word, but in certain contexts, the word can end up meaning something completely different. I was playing around with words a bit when I was thinking about what to say earlier, but it just fell off the end. But one of the little things, because we like these little snippety things, I've got communication builds community. And I came up with discourse needs discussion. That probably needs a bit more thinking about. But one of the speakers, and I think it's possibly the same one that said that they weren't an economist, said something about science, that they were a scientist and not an idealist. And I'm just like, I was absolutely gobsmacked by that, because I'm just like, the whole of science is completely idealistic. Why are we having this conference? Because we want something different. We're seeing that there can be a different way to do things, a different world. We want to solve all these problems and issues that we're talking about. I'm like, is that not what idealism is all about? So I was going to say, really happy for people to think about that. And I think the last thing I would say is that I don't think it's when we're talking about a just transition, and this is, one of the questions you've been asking people, what it means to us, I don't think it's idealistic to think that we should pay the real price for what we want. And I just think when when it was proved that the coal-fired power stations, the emissions from them were causing acid rain, we paid for flue gas desulfurization equipment to be retrofitted to all the power stations. So this thing about, you know, the coal, I'm like, of course we weren't suggesting that steel should be decarbonised. And I'm like, that's one of those sort of arguments that people use to dismiss something, isn't it? It's like, well, of course we weren't thinking that, but we should. And somebody else, I think it was Stuart, talked about, you know, where is the steel coming from that we're using at the moment? It's China. Is China decarbonising their steel processes? I don't think so. Whereas we, you know, we could, and I think, you know, we should. If that is the price of having steel, then we should pay the real price for steel.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Pauline. And I'm just quickly looking through my notes because I think it was on Monday, somebody came out with the most amazing, it wasn't a quote, it just came out of her mouth, which was around nationalisms for accountability's sake. And I think that's something
nationalism for, no, it was self-sufficiency for environmental reasons, not for nationalistic reasons.
There we go. And I think that then points to your point there, Pauline, in terms of actually, no, we can be accountable. We can make sure that those emissions aren't being pumped out. And actually, we look after human rights and we do all the rest of it as well. So fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So to all of our fantastic speakers from this session here this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are in the world, a massive, massive, massive thank you. Thank you so much. Absolutely brilliant. Fantastic. Cool. So just in words of closing for today, don't worry, you're almost free to go. Tomorrow morning, UK time, or very, 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 very late tonight for Stuart, and I think he shouldn't join it because it will be the middle of the night for him. We have our final session of this week, so session number 8. During this session tomorrow, we're going to be joined again by a whole host of wonderful people, including individuals who are working in Europe with regards to where the battery materials come from. In fact, we've got again some more of the people downstream of the majority of people that we've talked to over the course of the last week, and really saying, okay, well, where do these materials come from? How do we actually design these batteries, these vehicles, to make use of the most responsible material? What do we have coming through there? So really great discussions will be had tomorrow. But because we're in the kind of the Americas time zone, I just want to say thank you so much to all of you who have engaged in this conference over the past week. Truly, truly brilliant. A massive thank you to, there we go. A massive thank you to absolutely all of you. By the time we get to the end of tomorrow, we will have had more or less, because again, we always sneak in extra people. We will have had approximately 79 speakers with almost an equal split in terms of identified gender, which of course is much more exciting than just 2 different genders in there. We've had people speak from all over the world, so from the Philippines, Australia, the DRC, Ethiopia, South Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, the UK, France, different parts of Europe, Norway and Sweden, Peru, Canada, the US, etc. So it's been an incredibly diverse conference as well. We've had people who are very supportive of mining. We've had people who really think that mining should never, ever happen. And again, the way that we actually create this discussion and move forwards is by coming into the room and having those conversations, as Pauline was saying, and I think everybody's been echoing here today. With regards to what's happening next for responsible raw materials, go and check out Ludovine's talk that she gave at the beginning of the week. So that gives a little bit of an insight into what we're up to as an organisation. I'll be divulging more tomorrow. However, there are 3 things that I would like to share with you now. The first is a piece of education that we've been involved with. So Edgermine, which is a Canadian company or part of a Canadian publishing company, they have just launched today ESG in mining. So it's an online learning course. It's an introduction as to what on earth is this thing called ESG in the mining sector. And so do feel free to go and check that out, being run by, as I mentioned, being run by Edgermine. So that's really exciting. And we've been involved in that behind the scenes, haven't we, Rose? So Rose has mostly been involved in that, to be honest. This is all thanks to her making this happen from our end. The second thing to mention is that we will be at PDAC. So in June, those of you who are in the region or maybe trapped in Canada because their visas haven't come through to release them to other places, any of you who are going to be at PDAC, reach out and say hello, because we would love to see you, like face to face, you know, and see the back of your heads and how tall we all are and stuff like that. You know, it will be glorious. And we can, as said earlier on, we can wave our arms around in a very sensible and safe manner. So we'll be at PDAC. And then the final thing, because of course, one of our missions really is to engage with as broad a group of people as possible, is that, and I think this is the coolest thing that, to be honest, has ever happened. And I'm not even the one that's going. The science tent at Glastonbury. Okay, Glastonbury being a really big music festival in the UK. If you haven't heard of it, then we'll stick it into the chat. Okay, so this is like one of the big music festivals. They are taking their science tent and they're putting it right beside the main stage. So it's kind of getting prime position. Okay, so it's getting prime position. And in that tent, there is going to be a section on raw materials. And so that is going to be run by ourselves with the Geological Society. So Rose will be there at Glastonbury, engaging with the masses with regards to why it's so important for us to understand where all our raw materials come from that go into all of the bits and pieces that we have round about us. So really trying to engage with people who might not ordinarily understand or know or care about where all our materials come from. We might also take along some, I don't know, mineral growing kits as well, because that would probably go down quite well with the Glastonbury vibe. So with that, everybody, thank you. A massive, massive thank you to all of you today. And for those of you, depending on your time zone, we will see you at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning for the final session. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good one.